He married the woman who made sense. She was soft-spoken, predictable, grounded. She fit into the vision of the life he thought he was supposed to live. She ticked the boxes, made others nod in approval. She wasn't fire, but she kept things warm enough to not feel cold. And to the world, it looked like he did everything right. The ring, the vows, the home, the calendar full of plans. But behind all that, quietly pulsing like a second heartbeat, was a memory, a presence, a feeling that never went away. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't need to. Because some truths don't live in language. They live in energy, in silence, in dreams. You didn't fit. Not in the box he built around his life. You were too much, not in volume, but in depth. You didn't ask for permission to be seen. You just showed up as yourself, fully, and that shook him. You didn't make sense. You made him feel land. For a man who has been trained to control, to lead, to calculate, feeling something that real is terrifying. You didn't chase him. You didn't try to convince him. You simply stood there, as a mirror, reflecting the man he could be if he stopped hiding. And that was the problem. Not you, him, because he wasn't ready to stop hiding. He wasn't ready to surrender to a love that saw through him. He wasn't ready to become the version of himself that could meet you fully, so he called you a temptation, a disruption, a beautiful mistake. But deep down, in places he never lets anyone touch, he knew you weren't the mistake. You were the moment he saw himself clearly and chose to look away. He picked her, not because she stirred his soul, but because she didn't. She let him stay small, stay safe, stay structured. She didn't ask him to transform. You did, not with words, but with presence. Because you didn't love the mask, you loved the man beneath it, and that made you dangerous to the part of him that wanted to stay asleep. Now, every time he sits in silence, he remembers. Not just your voice, not just your laugh, but the way your energy filled the room before you even said a word. He remembers how his body reacted to you, not with lust, but with knowing. His skin remembered you like you had been there before, in another time, another lifetime, or maybe just in his dreams. But it was too much. He couldn't explain it, couldn't control it. And when a man can't control what he feels, he runs to what he can. So he ran to her, to the calm, to the rules, to the routine, and he built a life that looks perfect from the outside, but feels unfinished from the inside, because you're still in it, not in person, but in imprint. You're in the way. He avoids certain streets in the way. He flinches at your name in the way. He hesitates when asked if he's truly happy. You never wanted to haunt him. You just wanted to love him. But love that raw can't be forgotten. It lives in the bones, in the breath, in the blood, and even if he never speaks of you again, you're in every quiet moment. He can't fill every empty pause he tries to silence. You didn't fight for him because your soul already knew. You knew he wasn't ready. Not for your body, not for your mind, not for your truth. He wanted the way you made him feel, but not the parts of himself that your love awakened. And so he told himself that comfort was enough, that peace was more important than passion, that love didn't have to feel like fire. But deep down he remembers how warm you made him in a way no fireplace could. You never asked him to change. You just loved him in a way that made staying the same feel impossible. And that was the real threat. You brought him to the edge of his own becoming. He looked over the edge and stepped back. She caught him. She saved him from the leap. But now, he lives with a question he can't ask out loud. What if I had let myself fall? You live with that question too, but it doesn't haunt you the way it haunts him. Because you didn't abandon yourself to love him. He abandoned himself to avoid you. And that's why, even after all this time, you still appear in his mind, not as a fantasy, but as a possibility. Not because you were perfect, but because you were true. There is a kind of woman who doesn't just stay in a man's life. She stays in his soul. You were that woman. You were the one who didn't just kiss him but held the parts of him he didn't show anyone else. You were the one who didn't try to fix him but simply stood beside him in stillness until he could feel his own heartbeat again. And now he lies beside someone who loves him, but doesn't know him in that way. Not because she's lesser, but because she was never the mirror. You were. And being seen that deeply by someone who expects nothing but your truth is something no man forgets. So he smiles in photos. He pours wine at dinner. He talks about mortgages and weekend plans. But sometimes his eyes drift and he's not really there. He's in a memory or maybe a dream, standing in front of you again, wondering if this time he would have had the courage to stay. You were not the wrong woman. You were the awakening, the interruption of everything he thought he knew. and everything he was afraid to become. And that is why he chose her, because staying with you would have meant losing the version of himself that the world praised and stepping into the version of himself that only you saw. That version scared him, because it was honest, because it was raw, because it was real. Now he lives safe, but not whole. And you kept walking, not because you stopped feeling, but because you started remembering who you were before he came and before he left. And in that remembering you found your power again. He may never say it, may never admit it, but you are the one who taught him that love isn't about staying, it's about truth. And truth like yours never fades. Asterisk, you didn't just walk away. You carried him for a while, in thought, in memory, in every silent question you never asked out loud. But with time, you realized something sacred. He wasn't your loss, he was your lesson. He showed you how deeply you could feel, how powerfully you could love, how wide your soul could open. And then he showed you who wasn't ready for it. There's no shame in being the one who felt more, weakness in being the one who stayed present while the other turned away. Because the woman who stays awake while the man chooses sleep is the one who rises. She doesn't need closure because she carries completion within her. You didn't lose him, you kept yourself. And that is the kind of strength most people never find. So when you think of him now, let it be with soft eyes, not regret, because his choice wasn't a reflection of your worth, it was a mirror of his limits, and your love was never too much. It was just too real for the life he was too afraid to live. Before we begin, if something in this message speaks to you, it's not by accident. The Jung method was created to help you reconnect with the truth you've been carrying in silence. The link is in the first pinned comment. Now, take a breath, let's continue. He made his choice, the one everyone approved of, the one that looked right in wedding photos and sounded right in family conversations. He created a life that aligned with expectation, not with truth, because truth was terrifying, and you were its face. He doesn't speak of you now. Maybe he thinks he's forgotten, maybe he believes he's moved on, but forgetting is something the mind attempts, not the soul. The soul doesn't forget the place it felt most alive. It doesn't forget the moment it was seen and still held. It doesn't forget the woman who didn't just touch the skin, but the silence beneath it. He stays where it's quiet, where the temperature is stable, where his image remains intact. And sometimes that looks like peace, but it often feels like numbness. You weren't safe, not because you were harmful, but because you were true. And truth, when it collides with a life built on structure, is chaos. He felt that chaos in his chest. Not because you broke anything, but because you illuminated everything he never dared to face. And now he calls it the past, but it still wakes with him in the morning, still lingers when he closes his eyes at night. It shows up in the tension. He feels when she asks if he's okay, and he answers with a nod, because the real answer is too complex to say out loud. You were the contradiction he couldn't solve, the feeling that didn't fit the frame. And rather than expand to hold it, he folded himself back into the version he knew how to be. But the thing about energy is that it doesn't leave, it transforms. You are no longer in his bed, but you are in his blood, in the rhythm of his thoughts, in the space between his breath and the truth he never claimed. And you don't need to haunt him to be unforgettable. You simply exist as the woman who taught him that comfort is not the same as connection, that stability without soul is a quiet kind of suffering. He may never tell anyone about you, not his wife, not his friends, not even himself, fully. But in those rare moments when the mask slips, when he lets the noise fade, when he's honest with the silence, he knows. He knows he didn't choose wrong. Because you were too much. He chose her because he wasn't enough, not enough to meet your depth, not enough to stand inside your truth, not enough to hold what you were offering with both hands and an open heart. And that knowing it never leaves. It lives in the tension between what he has and what he feels in the space, between what he chose and what he craves. He touches her with care, but he remembers the way his hands trembled with you, not because of lust, but because of recognition. You weren't just a body to him, you were a doorway to everything he forgot he was, and everything he didn't know how to become. You represented evolution, and evolution is rarely convenient. You were the reason he felt something shift inside, and the reason he ran, because staying would have required burning down everything false, and starting again with nothing but the truth. You didn't ask for that, but your presence demanded it, and now he lives between two worlds, the one he shows and the one he never talks about. He laughs at dinner parties, but sometimes he feels the weight of a life he built without soul, and wonders if peace is worth this quiet ache. He tells himself he made the right choice, but the right choice doesn't usually echo in your chest. At 2 a.m. he doesn't regret the life, he regrets the silence, the words never spoken, the version of himself he never let rise. And you don't wait, you don't chase, you don't reach back, not because you stopped loving, but because you started choosing yourself more than the memory of a man who couldn't meet you. You moved forward with the fire still in your chest, and the softness still in your hands, and that is what makes you unforgettable. It didn't just leave you transformed. You turned the ache into wisdom, the rejection into reflection, the longing into light. He doesn't see your posts anymore, doesn't know where you are, but he wonders, not in a possessive way, but in that soul-deep way that says, what I touched was real and I let it go. He knows you weren't asking to be chosen, you were asking to be met, and he couldn't, because to meet you he would have had to meet himself, and that's the one person he's still afraid of. Now, he walks a straight path with clean lines and smiling photographs, but part of him still lives in the crooked moment. When you looked at him and didn't blink, you saw him without filters, without titles, without his armor, and that was too honest for a man who wasn't done hiding. So he returns, not in messages, but in energy. He thinks of you in the quiet, in the ache, in the tension between who he became and who he could have been. You feel it not as hope, but as truth. He will never admit it, but part of him still leans in your direction even now. Because when a man has touched something holy, something sacred, something real, he never forgets, even if he never finds the courage to return to it. You were that sacred thing, not his possession, not his mistake, but his mirror, and mirrors don't lie. You simply reflected back the soul he hadn't met yet, and asked nothing but truth in return. He couldn't give it, so you gave it to yourself, and that is what he'll carry long after the vows, long after the anniversaries, long after the illusion is no longer enough to quiet the ache. He married the right woman, but his soul, it always belonged to you. And maybe, one day, he'll sit across from someone and say it out loud. Maybe he'll finally find the words he couldn't speak when it mattered, not to win you back, not to reopen anything, but simply to honor what was real. Because some connections don't fade, they deepen in silence. Some truths don't disappear, they carve themselves into the soul until they're no longer avoidable. And when he finally admits it, to himself too, the sky to no one at all, he'll understand that the love he felt with you wasn't a moment, it was a message that he was capable of more, of deeper feeling, of greater becoming, of truth. And even though he didn't step into that truth with you, you were the doorway, the awakening, the beginning. You were not forgotten, you were foundational. And no matter how far he runs from that version of himself, you will always be the one who reminded him that love, real love, is not about comfort, but about courage. And that is what made you unforgettable.